Amazing wisdom.
Entrepreneurs,
business leaders,
Success.
CEOs,
Amazing success.
around the world.
This is the Success Nuggets podcast. Have you ever wondered what you could learn and how inspired you'd be if you asked incredible people from around the world about the patterns that drive progress? Get ready to dive into a world of insights and inspiration. This is the Success Nuggets podcast with the founder of the Digital Light Bulb and your host, David Abel.
Hello everyone, David here with the latest whirlwind of inspiration to reset our minds and achieve success, however and whenever we wish for. The Success Nuggets podcast has taken us on a journey of discovery all around the beautiful planet, and today we're treated to a guest who's in Finland, Mr. Tuomo Vauhkonen. Hello Tuomo.
Hey, how you doing, David? What's going on?
I'm very well, thanks. You're a life performance coach for high achievers. What is a high achiever?
There we go. You're starting from the deep end. I suppose everybody can be a high achiever. Like these stigmas that we put in, like you have to achieve a certain status, if you will. But wherever you're starting from, wherever, like that's where, for example, in my coaching, that's where I meet the people. And then the high achievement, the high performance, we all have the quote unquote next level or the step up. And that's where I try to get the people to go to. And then there's obviously this, if you look at, media, social media especially, there's this thing called high performance, which is, people think like, oh, I need to be there. I need to be a sports star or, a big CEO of the company who is working 24/7 or 16 hours a day. And that's kind of the stigma of the high performance or high achievement. But anybody can get there if they want to. And setting those boundaries and limits is definitely a personal thing. So, yeah, that's where I come to play.
Okay, cool. Right. So I don't have to worry about getting 1 million followers. It's just continuously getting to the next step is good enough.
Exactly.
Okay. A lot of people live in cities. I know you live in French Polynesia.
Correct.
As well. How does nature combine with high performance?
Well, if I look back at my journey and my childhood, if you will, like I was always connected to nature. We lived right next to the forest and lake. So that's part of me. That's part of my DNA. I've always been surrounded by pristine beauty and green and blue spaces. And that's what Finland is a lot about as well. And all throughout my life, that has always been the central focus. And I just feel like it is an essential part of us as human beings, if you will, as well. And it really connects and centers us. And if you look at high performance or high achievement, if you will, that's where in the space of calm, that's the space where you come from. And that's where we get to the quote unquote next level. If you're all the time ramped up and you're revving your engine too high and you're up here already, it's really hard to kind of ever calm down or to get to that next level. So the nature for me is really good, the calming and the soothing it, and it grounds me and puts me into my right place, if you will. And then that's kind of where you can then step up and go further and go forward. So nature is a huge part of who I am as a person as well.
And did many people come to you for coaching from the city who don't really get the nature, who are 24/7?
Yeah, for sure. Luckily, depending where you are, but especially here in Scandinavia where I live. And I would say that most of the cities, especially in Europe, if you want to, you can find some green spaces. Not necessarily right in the next block, but you can take a train, you can take a car for 15 to 20 minutes, and often we find a green space. If it's not an old growth, beautiful forest or a lake, but you can find some bigger parks that you can at least daily basis get connected to. And then I always recommend people to, if not weekly, at least monthly basis, take a little bit of a city escape and go somewhere in the nature, in the woods or by the lake or the ocean or the forest or what have you, and get centered over there.
Oh, that's cool. I think a lot of people, when they kind of get stuck and they go backwards, they actually maybe sit at their desk, over worry, overthink. What are the risks that we see with high performance people? Do they burn out more or?
Well, there's definitely risks. I would even maybe turn it the other way around oftentimes, because again, the high performance, it gets sometimes a bad name or the bad rap, especially for that reasons, because the burnout is the big thing these days. But I would say a lot of the high performers or a lot of the high achievers, especially when it's coupled with passion, with purpose, those things, those internal attributes, they give you so much more fuel, they give you so much more meaning that you're able to endure a lot. versus if you're not in purpose, if you haven't found your passion, if you're not entirely sure why you do what you do, it's difficult to perform at your highest levels. And even further from there, oftentimes the lack of a better word, the average performance, or if you're not in your A game, oftentimes we're actually lacking a deeper meaning to it, why we do what we do. And I think that's actually a huge part of my work is the internal part of the high performance. Because we look at that, because the high performance is oftentimes we think about as in external, the huge habits, the 16-hour days, the early mornings or late nights. But there's a huge part, and that's where the coaching comes into play, is the internal work, is the internal game, where we look at what are we actually passionate about and what is the true purpose behind why we do what we do. And all of a sudden, the whole thing kind of gets onto its head. And all of a sudden, those longer days, they become in a way shorter. And even further, taking from there, once we find that, we actually becoming faster. We just, before we hit air, you actually mentioned that oftentimes you try to work less, but when we work less, we actually are more efficient. And we might get into these states called flow, the flow states where we're able to produce in a much higher level and productivity goes through the roof. And all of a sudden you're going to actually work less, but performing higher. And so those are, I mean, there's a lot more to it, but in a nutshell, that's where we can we can do with personal coaching.
It sounds like a dream. How quickly can people find their purpose if they haven't?
It can happen in a blink of an eye. It can happen through deep experiences, but most often, I would say it's a discovery. Sometimes it might take years. Sometimes it might take days or months. It's really hard to put a time frame because it really depends where the person's at or where each person's journey is different. Some people never find their purpose. Some people, I know, I have some friends from back in my childhood, they knew exactly what they wanted to do when they were 16. They didn't call it purpose, they just knew it. And now looking at 30, 40 years after, that person is doing exactly what they told me at 16. Wow. Okay. So, that's it's an interesting path. And when I was at 16, I was like, I had absolutely no idea where I wanted to be or what I wanted to do. It was a big discovery project in my case.
Well, I think there's a fear from many that they have to earn a certain amount, they have to get a pension. And I guess it's the fear for many of stepping out of their comfort zone at this stage of life.
Yeah, exactly. And that's my coaching. What I like to sort of always reflect on is two mediums, if you will, is the external life and the internal life, or internal game and the internal game, if you will. And most people, especially in that corporate life, play that external game. We measure our achievements through salaries, through physical achievements. And we don't look at the internal game or internal life hardly at all. Versus for me, it's a 50-50 game, right? Some people like to call it that it's 80% internal, 80% the mindset and 20% of the activity. But here's one of the insights that I always like to offer to people. It doesn't really matter where you start from. If you start from, let's say, high performance or habits or fitness or a lifestyle or diet, or you start from sort of internal work, sort of the journaling, the meditation route, maybe yoga and these kind of internal activities, if you will, or coaching. But in the end of the day, both are needed. And everybody starts from somewhere. You got to start from somewhere when you want to change. You want to find your purpose. You want to find your passion. You want to change something externally. You got to start from somewhere. And it doesn't really matter where you start from because everything is needed anyways to reach sustainable change and basically get to where you want to go. So
what happens if it's not sustainable? So someone's been doing it for 2-3 years. They get some bad news or something triggers them. They stumble, they fall, and then they lie down in the mud. They don't see it as a trip.
Yeah.
Everything's over. How do those kind of people?
And when you say everything is over, what do you mean by that?
Well, so let's say,
because when you say everything is over, I have an image that probably not many that's kind of like,
yeah, I guess for some people they're just, I don't know, for whatever reason, whether it's self-worth or value, the smallest thing can seem like a catastrophe.
Absolutely.
And the whole world's fallen in. Sorry, go.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I hear you. I just wanted to sort of play with words a little bit. But obviously, one huge thing that I've been, again, reflecting on, especially lately, being 4 months here in Finland, is the depth of our relationships and depth of our support network. And the people that do not have that or are maybe in a period of life or stage of life where the support is not there. I'm biased to say that coaching is there as a huge thing, but the relationships that we have with our loved ones, with our friendships, with connections to our workmates and the people at our workspaces, those are huge. They're absolutely tremendous source of network and safety net. And if we don't rely on those, if you don't utilize those relationships, I think that sort of burnout or finding yourself in the mud, as you mentioned, becomes a lot more imminent. The relationships are absolutely huge in my case. And then obviously the other thing is that, you need to have certain principles in place and guardrails and so on and so forth. And allow yourself to do the internal work, not just the external.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. What about corporations? There's 10,000 people working in a business. Someone can feel very lonely within a business. Do you see corporations kind of making any positive change within HR and mentoring or looking after people better?
To be very honest, I'm not 100% in that space. I'm more in the one-on-one space.
Yeah.
Well, I see the corporate space from further out. I haven't been internally in those spaces a lot, actually, ever in my life. So I'm not a perfect person to comment on that. But I work with people one-on-one from that space, so I can comment more sort of in the individual levels from that. But definitely, and it's interesting. Because especially if you're more introverted, you might feel more lonely in big spaces with lots of people instead of being kind of by yourself. And I think you have to see where and how you work the best and where you produce the best results and where you feel the most alive. Some people do that in big teams of 10 to 20 to 100 people. And some people work best when they're individual, kind of left alone. So that's something that managers and directors also have to take into consideration. I understand we don't always have time for that, but if you're able to meet the person one-on-one at their level, we're able to get more out of that person if you're a director or a manager, if you will.
An active body stimulates the mind. How does trail running fuel your pathways to fulfillment?
Oh, wow. That's an interesting. It's really hard because it's such a near and dear to my heart, especially right now in the last 2 to 3 years. It's hard to give you like a nutshell answer to that, but let's put it this way: like running's been always part of my life. I've always been fairly good at it, even if I didn't like it, especially as a kid. As I mentioned, I grew up in right next to the forest, and I was always in the woods, like playing around and orienteering and running, but I never really enjoyed, especially the competitive part of it. I knew that I was good at it, but I always wanted to do other things. I wanted to play basketball and tennis and football and, more of team sports. And that's what I wanted to do. But I kind of knew that I wasn't really good at those things, but I knew that I'm good at this, but I never was able to sort of capitalize on those. And now in the last sort of 3 to 5 years, if you will, I was like, okay, I'm actually kind of still good at this thing. And then I was able to combine this thing called trail running, which is kind of a new thing. Well, I would say it's a new thing, but especially in the mainstream, it's only been like 5 to 10 years. And there's these big competitions. And I mean, yes, they're competitive, but it's more, you just put together a whole bunch of like-minded people. You go into the trails and everybody's cheering for each other's. Everybody wants everybody to win in a sense. And it's more, it's the game. It's like you're playing against yourself instead of the other runners. So I love it. It's a huge part of my fulfillment, as you said. And to be honest, I just came back from a run from here in Finland, and it's a bluebird day, and it was just crispy, beautiful morning, and it was just 99% of the time when I'm out there, I have a good day afterwards, and I just truly, truly enjoy it. So, yeah.
Beautiful, man. Beautiful. Right. Before we go, because it's such a short podcast, do you have a one golden nugget that you could share?
I was reflecting, what can I leave you with and your community with? And I actually this is really fresh in my mind, and it just came today in my journaling session this morning after the run. And I just actually wrote it down because it's so fresh. So, and it kind of reflects everything we just chatted about. Is the best and richest life is lived through the depth of our relationships. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, especially for me. It really, truly resonates. As I was writing it down this morning, I was like, that really feels feels good in my soul, if you will. And the relationships are truly the source of the richest life for me. And I think for many, if you really look into it, if you look at the high achievement and performance, and if and when you get to the mountaintop and you have no one to share it with, what was it worth it? Like, was it worth it? And there's so many people that they feel lonely up in the mountaintop. And I'm not entirely sure if it's worth it if you're up there and you don't have anyone to share it with.
Yeah.
So
that's great. That's wonderful. Well, this podcast often leaves myself and its listeners enlightened and incentivized. And with these precious few minutes, I think you are further proof that we need each other to help each other. So heartfelt thanks, Tuomo. We wish you well. We shall see you again on the Success Nuggets for the next episode.
David and his incredible guests next time on the Success Nuggets podcast. And to find out more, visit onegoldennugget.com. Thank you for listening.